Ray Tracer, and a lager chaser. It's July 1997, and this is Yesterzine. Sony haven't been in the console business for even 2 years in the UK, but by the middle of 1997 it was clear they were in control. The Saturn is all but vanquished, as we saw a few episodes back. To prove the point, a mere 4 months after that issue of Mean Machine Sega marked its closure, official PlayStation reviews 14 games. Of those, 0 would ever be released on Saturn. That at least isn't true of the only 4-month-old N64, but Nintendo have already been forced into a panic price cut in the UK, and while we'll see some strong opinions about it later, no one serious would ever suggest it to be winning the generation beyond this point. So the PlayStation stands tall, in desperate need of a direct competitor that isn't constantly shooting itself in its own feet, so Sony don't feel free to constantly and completely take the piss.
You may not need much effort to imagine yourself in the place of the 90s gamer this month.
In the meantime though, we've got an astonishingly good lineup of games for a single month, including the best game in a legendary series, and another series who appears to think its best hope is you'll mistake its new game for that first one. First though, while Sony's opportunities look very much the same 30 years ago as they are now, there's some important differences. Twice in 2 months we've pointed out how much bigger the industry is now, and here's another indication. The PlayStation has reached 1 million UK sales, an incredible figure, and one the PlayStation 5 doubled in the same time frame. Nonetheless, the Saturn's share of that market is 3% at this point, and has just learnt the sequel to their most famous exclusive isn't even getting a release. We already know Nintendo are on the back foot, charging as much as £65 for games in a world where even Sony accepted full price was $35 to $40. And if that's making you annoyed, the other main story is that Sony are apparently cutting the PlayStation's price. Oh yeah, we should explain this. Back in the olden days, games consoles used to get cheaper during their life, rather than just continually more expensive and often worse. The rumour is that the PlayStation, that famously launched at $299, would be getting a cut to a third of that. After 2 years.
It's making me angry to even type it, to be honest with you.
This didn't quite happen, but the machine was already widely available for $129, and a game catalogue from the time shows you could have it with literally any game for £160, and also have a second controller and memory card, neither of which would have been in your £300 launch package. It's what I did. It's interesting though, because Sony are under absolutely no pressure here and are still cutting prices. It was just expected. It's almost adorable compared to the approach of the 3 remaining mainstream console makers in 2026 who, while experiencing pressure from weaponized hallucination machines that are using all your computer and drinking all your water, have all increased the prices of their consoles that in 2 cases are now nearly 6 years old. As always, the most important part of the news section historically is never the top story. At the bottom of a section on the then relevant E3 show, after Resident Evil 2, there's a note that we have confirmation some obscure Japanese RPG called Final Fantasy VII will be making its way to the UK. You might have heard of it. It did quite well. The PS1 was always a driving game powerhouse, and so the following sentence is less remarkable on this machine than it would be on others. There are 4 driving games reviewed this month. 2 are incredibly well known, 1 more would be if people realised what it was, but we'll get to that in a minute. For now, let's just start with the sequel to a PlayStation crown jewel. Ridge Racer launched the PlayStation. Along with Tekken, it was the result of console rookie Sony making a deal with Namco that resulted in the PlayStation hardware having some key similarities with Namco's arcade machines, and with conversions being heavily prioritised. The version of Ridge that reached the PlayStation was by no means perfect, but when placed alongside Saturn's first attempt at Daytona in stores, was practically an entire sales team on its own. A racing game feature in this very issue goes as far as to break out the quote,
Ridge Racer probably helped sell more PlayStations than Sony and Namco could ever have hoped for.
What becomes clear in hindsight, though, is how thin and inexperienced the original Ridge is. It came up on this show some 62 episodes ago, and the basic game is as compelling as ever. but it's also very content light. It's really just the one track with some races using a low-effort extension I referred to as Afterthought Alley. A semi-sequel Ridge Racer Revolution smoothed over some of the rough edges, but was basically the same experience and somewhat cynically was released in Japan virtually simultaneously with us getting the original. The UK saw Revolution an almost sarcastic 6 months later. This only served to compound the problem as the real sequel Rage Racer was released a year to the day after Revolution in Japan, making it just another 6 months after the PAL version of Revolution. Rage had its PAL release delayed 4 months after America. This was supposedly to avoid clashing with the other high-profile Namco conversion Soul Edge, but the cynical would perhaps consider giving at least a little breathing room to Revolution was central to Soul Edge getting the May release slot. In the UK at least, this created a further problem. This pushed Rage Racer back to this issue, where it shares the review section with an entirely distinct driving game called Ray Tracer. I do not envy anyone behind the counter at game trying to field those pre-order queries. We'll play that one later though, because it's a lot more interesting than its seemingly rip-off name makes it sound. For now, Ray Tracer.
Rage Racer?
Yes, sorry. For now, Rage Racer is Namco branching out a little, and part of that is, this isn't an arcade machine. Neither technically was Revolution, but it was certainly still constructed like one. For a third arcade game though, Namco released Rave Racer, and that's worth a quick look, especially as its first home release was only a couple of months ago. Annoyingly, especially for my chances of capturing it, there's no PC version, even though we nearly got one in the 90s. So what you're seeing here is the arcade version, just so we're not all staring at a blank screen. The All Machines console version is pleasingly cheap, but that's for a reason. 2 of the 4 courses in Rave are just the original and extended original from Ridge, something that would have been fine in the arcade but now seems rather tight, especially as Hamster have previously re-released Ridge itself. Still, in an arcade this would be a perfectly nice little upgrade. 2 new courses to explore, some handling changes, warmed over graphics. For a smidge over a tenner, with access to the dip switches etc, you'll get your money's worth. Just don't go in expecting anything of Revolution. It does though leave them free to do a little more with Rage, and it's clear so immediately. While the PlayStation version of Ridge Racer just launches straight into an arcade-style demo, Rage has one of the most iconic intros of all time.
Absorb the speed and power of your wave machine. Become the baddest, the one and only Rage Racer. Don't let it blow out of my eye.
Which then proceeds to a track loop very much stressing more of the racing than Ridge Racer ever did. It also introduces Ridge's mascot, Reiko Nagase, to the home. Reiko was in Rave Racer, but here's where she first gains any semblance of not being scenery by being granted such important character growth as a name. There are also now 4 courses, although all 4 will share the same start line, and 3 of them use the same first half mile or so. Partly, I think this is to show off. My overriding memory of playing this when I bought it immediately is just how pretty this initial run up the hill looked. The waterfall especially is an iconic point, and noticeably above anything the previous games were doing. The first course, Mythical Coast, is the vaguely familiar one. It's not the course from the original Ridge Racer, but it certainly hits several of the same beats, with the steep descent out the tunnel, run along the seafront and then up a long hill. Thankfully there are no alleys, afterthought or otherwise. The colour palette is a lot more muted than the colourful vistas of Ridge Racer, a fact that attracted criticism at the time. Now, especially having lived through the forthcoming era where grey, green and brown were the only allowable video game colours, Rage's reputation for looking like Basingstoke in February feels undeserved when you encounter that seafront section and the clear blue skies of the rest of this course. The other way Rage is adding depth is the career mode, beginning with a truly fabulously over-the-top intro for a relatively simple concept. This is still an arcade game, of course. The basic premise here is we have 5 increasingly difficult classes of races for a total of 18 events. The main 3 courses will appear at all levels, and the flat-out oval course only in the last 3. You will need to finish in the top 3 of all races to progress, with a restriction on the number of chances you have, because again, it still remembers it's an arcade game. To help you, they give you one starting car that has slightly less power than an asthmatic lawnmower, and access to both a car showroom and mechanic to either upgrade or purchase new and faster cars. Broadly, you're going to need your car to be on level for it to have a chance, especially on that oval, which I imagine isn't included on the lowest levels because this beginner car would probably take a couple of weeks to get round it. It's a good progression because it affects how you drive. The initial class isn't boring, but the cars will not keep their speed up on hills. This means that it's vitally important to keep up momentum, as a collision at the bottom of that hill will cause you to climb it marginally slower than continental drift. Vital when a couple of tracks have a lot of height. In general, the game leans on verticality and spectacle for the tracks. The waterfall is the classic example, but plunging descents where you can sometimes see other cars halfway around the tracks join super quick tunnel sections that echo parts of Outrun. And it's worth remembering that Outrun is barely a decade old at this point. The game changes somewhere around Class 3, where I decide to upgrade my little Fiat 500 clone rather than buy a new car, resulting in its engine spilling out of the boot in which it's kept. The fact upgrading has a visual effect is a lovely little touch, and briefly distracts me from the slight worry that the 500 is not a speed car and I haven't attempted the oval yet. It's at this point the ability to get around the line right becomes a lot more important. Most of the corners can still be done flat, but you have to be super accurate to do it. The tighter hairpin corners now require the power slide mechanic, and this is where I fall down. Rather than the later, more Outrun 2E system used by later games that Rave was already moving towards, this very much echoes the first 1.5 games. It's not a system I've ever got along with, which is a problem as the controls have not meaningfully moved on from the launch games. In many ways this is fine, it's never been bad as such, but any drift usually ends up in a pendulum for far too long and scrubbing off more speed than I would if I just bounced it off the wall a couple of times instead. At one point I experiment with some success doing so deliberately before the corner and then accelerating through it. The review over in CVG magazine has some thoughts on this. It advises using the brake and that contact with the barrier will not be registered as you were slowing down anyway, essentially implying what seems to be wall riding, and the figures on their speedo are enticing. I have literally never managed to make it work. My ghetto version of the same concept has got me solidly to the end of Class 3 though at the time of writing, and frankly if I didn't have to adapt to finish it off then this would be a short game, albeit one many times the longevity of its two very thin forebears. As it is, especially if you're coming to it now, it's pretty much a perfect length. In theory you can finish it in 3 hours, but you certainly won't, and you'll want to grind anyway to get good versions of all of the 10 cars. You'll probably need to. I'm loving what the magazine calls a mini, but it's never going to get me wins on the oval, it simply doesn't have the power. Which probably leads to my other real criticism. It just doesn't need that credit system. It's already gating your progress with the more traditional game methods. This isn't an arcade game, and it's not really a reason for it to act like it. That said, I've not seen anything here that changes my opinion that this is the best in the series. The later ones, with a more modern drift system, do tend to lose their identity a little bit. It's not quite Ridge Racer anymore, and they probably overpad their game progression a little more than is needed. They also have the controversial at best introduction of nitrous, something I don't have the strong feelings others do about, but it's not something Ridge Racer needs. Half the viewership is currently screaming at their YouTube viewing device about the traditional choice, Ridge Racer Type 4. I've never been best fond of this one to the extent it might just be my least favourite, and perhaps we'll need to play it in an episode to really find out why. I think though that it goes too far in pretending to be based on a real racing series while not actually being in any way a real racing series. So it's adding nothing for a racing fan like me, but does pad it out with an absurd amount of story fluff. I also have memories of getting the credits really quickly in it. So for me, this is the best Ridge, and even if you're a Type 4 fan, if you ever slept on this one, you should stop doing so. It's an accessible few hours even if you play it at surface level, and you'll get to somewhere around Class 3 and have a grand old arcadey time. But if you dig deeper, learn to use those manual gears, start upgrading and customising your cars, and perhaps figure out either the power slide system or whatever the bloody hell CVG are on, you could lose weeks. Which does mean we might as well go straight on to its phonetic namesake, which is a lot more famous than you're going to think it is at first. This is Ray Tracer.
Ray Tracer?
Oh yes, sorry. I'm being a little bit silly, because that name is a typo on the magazine's part, and the game is actually called the barely more distinguishable Ray Tracers.
Ray Tracers?
Shut up. Because a game by any other name would still be the one you've basically seen before, and for the keen-eyed, the Taito logo is the clue. Ray Tracers isn't considered a sequel to Chase HQ, but it really, really is, and so it's worth looking at that game first. This is Chase HQ, a lovely little 1988 arcade game where you hunt down a criminal, and then when you get there, use your remaining time to beat their car into submission until they are forced to pull over and you can arrest them. It got conversions to everything, some great like the Master System and Spectrum efforts, and some that looked and moved like they were being charged by the frame. The last direct home conversion of it was barely a year old at this point, a vaguely coherent one to the Sega Saturn. That Saturn port made up for some of trying to sell a direct port of an 8-year-old arcade game by bundling a second one, which isn't Chase HQ 2, that's the fourth game and didn't exist yet.
Oh god, it's Wonder Boy all over again.
Special Criminal Investigation came along the next year in the arcade and added shooting to the mix. Obviously it also got conversions, and again I highlight the Master System port for reasons Dave from Zylog and Moto recently reminded us all of. The SMS game is 6 stages. A reasonably competent games player can finish it in about 20 minutes on your first try. He's right. I did. So if you're feeling a little down and want to say you at least completed a video game today, there's an option for you. It does use up on the joypad to accelerate. Sorry about that. They followed this up with Super Chase HQ, which wasn't named in honour of the SNES, but might as well be because that's where you'll find the only home conversion. And so we have a weird parallel with Namco, because with the next arcade instalment a full decade away, they had the chance to do more with a home-only game nominally in the series. They chose to distance it, at least partially, with an entirely new name, and while most sources don't consider it a Chase HQ game, stay tuned. Pausing only to note the main mode of the game is literally called Chase. Starting the game and chasing down the first boss, we notice one important difference. Nitro is now a gauge rather than a number of servings. This is footage from my first attempt, as is probably obvious from me wanging it straight into that column, and it'll be important why in a bit. But I've quickly realised the trick is the same as in the older games. Mainly, save your nitro until the boss. Said boss turns up on time and he's quite the upgrade from some kidnapper in a legally distinct Porsche. Well, once you get to see him anyway. For some reason the game thinks what you need at full speed, probably in a turn, with the boss in front of you and the timer already ticking down, is to cover the entire screen with text telling you what you've already realised. This is going to happen every time you reach a boss. The graphics are different. The boss is very, very different, but fundamentally here we're playing the same game we were in 1988. This will continue through the stages. The first 4 are basically retreads of what you've already seen, but with more and more silly bosses, including, for some reason, a helicopter.
Helicopter!
Where did that come from?
On the plus side, in abeyance of video game logic, he is at least kind enough to keep landing so I can nitro into his face. Some bosses also start taking pot shots at you, but they're more an irritant at this stage than anything that's going to take you out of the game. Stage 5 mixes things up. It's a boss rush, and this is where I fail on my first go. Mainly because of course I don't know it's a boss rush, and I get to this last boss without much left. He's the first one with a proper weapon to use against you though, and I just run out of time trying to deal with him and getting hit by the circular saw too many times. But here's the thing. That's my first go ever, with virtually no knowledge. I got to very much the end of stage 5. There's only 6 stages. We're in SCI territory again. Still, it's now time for the plot.
I am Kaiser, and the roads belong to me.
There it was. Did you enjoy it? Kaiser is a predictable massive difficulty spike. You get 230 seconds because it can take more rearward collisions than your mum, and that won't be easy because it's also just as fast. Burning boost is tempting, but it'll never last long enough. Not burning it means you have to engage with the driving model for perhaps the first time, because you'll need to be perfect to get anywhere close, even when you realise that this whole section is on a fairly short looping track. So far, I've not beaten getting her below about half health in the time limit. The whole game feels very old school. Despite those clever bosses you couldn't have done on a Master System and slightly more variety, there's very little here that feels like it's fundamentally moved on. This is an 8 or 16-bit game in some slightly grainy 3D coating. In a world where the likes of Gran Turismo are on the horizon, or perhaps more to the point, Rage Racer, I can see why this is mostly forgotten as an option for your £40. There was no direct sequel, although it did get a Japanese-only PlayStation Classics re-release in the PS3 days. The next we heard from the series was Chase HQ 2, which I don't think has an official home port. It does get lost in this issue's serving of the absurd number of racing games on PSX. We're not even going to have time to mention the iconic V-Rally, which gets the same 9 out of 10 Rage Racer does. And certainly no time to test how it compares to a sequel I remember being considerably better. Sony's first party offering, Rallycross, is a 7 out of 10 footnote, and we certainly don't have the time to discover why this magazine called it almost brilliant. And that's just the one per week reviewed in this issue, of which Tracer is probably 4th of 4 in terms of hype. And given not everyone is buying a new racing game every month, you'd also have seen the previews mentioning Lotus developer Magnetic Fields' International Rally Championship, and Micro Machines developer Supersonic Software's Circuit Breakers. They're known as Supersonic Racing 2. Nor are we mentioning the elephant in most rooms in possibly the greatest F1 game of all time, Formula 197, Delphine's Moto Racer, or even Interplay's Powerboat. Just this month, Ray Tracer is competing with all 8 of them for your money, and at best it places in the middle. OPSM give it 7 out of 10, and at the time that's generous. It's a weekend rental of a game in 1997. Now it's a different matter, and a weekend arcade laugh is a great thing. It feels stranded back in the previous generation, and it's not a surprise it's the series' endpoint. If we're honest, it's the fate that also affected Rage Racer. While there were a couple of attempts to update that series too, its arcade run was already basically over, and the home ones would get less and less traction in the same way. Ridge Racer 6 and 7 were footnotes as launch titles for the 360 and PS3 compared to the Gran Turismos and Project Gothams of that world, and we've not seen a new Ridge in nearly as long as we've not seen a new Chase HQ. So really, we have 2 games with the same name and the same problem, albeit to different levels at this point. In 2026, the answer though is the same. Ray Tracers would be an entertaining if short-lived affair, and so long as you're emulating rather than paying the price it goes for, the answer is the same as it was for Ray Tracer. Play it. Because while it's not an essential like Rage, if you want a very decent 32-bit arcade time, you could do a lot worse than Ray Tracers.
Ray Racers?
Okay, now you're just being silly. Oh, come on. The nice thing about picking up a games magazine from this era is there's always something to see. Obviously, the real reason we did this issue is because it's the one magazine that reviewed that and Ray Tracers at the same time, and we do not let a running gag chance like that go begging. But sometimes you get a gift, and ours occurs on page 22, because there's a head-to-head quiz involving Dave Perry.
No, not that one. The one that wrote Aladdin.
And Dave Perry.
Yes, that one.
Both are well known for various reasons as... how to make this not legally actionable. Ah yes, complete wankers. But which complete wanker knows more about games, Shiny or Animal? Feel free to play along at home and tell me how you got on in the comments so YouTube mistakes that for actual engagement. Name the 2 Star Wars games on PlayStation. Well, there were about 50 by the time the format expired, but at this point, just Dark Forces and Rebel Assault 2. The game's Animal knows it. Shiny only knows Dark Forces. I don't blame him though. Rebel Assault 2 is reviewed in this issue and gets 2 out of 10. I'm very glad I do not have the time in this episode to find out why. What genre is Vandal Hearts? Well, it's an RPG. Animal takes another. What's Sony's Powerboat game? Neither knew this and I didn't either. It's not Powerboat, which we just saw, but a game called Rapid Racer from the team that would go on to make the Getaway series. Who is currently working on G-Police? Well, Shiny falls on his face again, but Animal slightly lucks out by getting a point for publisher Psygnosis, rather than the technically correct answer of their internal dev team Wheelhouse. Named 4 Namco titles, 2 Ridge Racers, 2 Tekkens.
That's on me, I set the bar too low.
A pair of freebies. What year is Psygnosis game Riot set in? Neither knows. Animal guesses the same year as the same publishers Wipeout 2097 and gets lucky. Conversely, name the lead character in Wild 9. Well, it's Shiny's game, so he gets one back. And finally, what's the Japanese name for air race? Well, apparently it's Reciproheat 5000, but that pales in comparison to its American name, Bravo Air Race, that just makes it sound like someone is really happy to see an air race.
Bravo! Air race!
Animal is the only one to get it. Strange really, since he so recently claimed to have no interest in import games.
So what you're saying, Dave, is the biggest game of this year. You haven't played much.
It's not released till next year. I'll play it next year when it's released in this country.
Okay, you are a journalist. We can get it on import.
Not a journalist, I'm a marketing manager.
Speaking of which, Animal also gets a point for describing Dominic Diamond as an arsehole to take an easy 12-8 win overall. That's not what this competition is though. We wanted Biggest Wanker, and I'll let you judge this. First, Shiny Dave claims his favourite games are Aladdin, Earthworm Jim 1, Earthworm Jim 2, MDK, and Wild 9. You'll have twigged immediately, all of which were designed by himself. Classic wanker behaviour. But let me at least offer Animal's entry. Both dodged the question of who was Dave Perry first by claiming complete ownership of the name, but their ages provide a clue. Shiny is 30-something, and Animal is 20-something. Easy win then. Shiny was there first. He was indeed just turned 30 as this issue goes to press. But here's the thing. Animal is lying about his age. He's 11 months older than Shiny is, and was 31 years old at the point he wrote 20-something on a form he knew would be read by a couple of 100,000 people. Wanker. Just before we move on, a massive sign of the times catches my eye. Future is launching the magazine Connect. It's about the internet and internet things for people already on the internet. It's got a cover CD. There is one more item of interest in this issue. It's 1997 and Amiga Power has come and gone by this point of course, but one thing they always rallied against, in their golden age, is what they called interviews with people in the software industry of interest only to other people in the software industry. This comes despite them doing one themselves, as we saw when we looked at their first issue the best part of 2 years ago now. It also comes despite the fact that the chairman of this discussion is Steve Farraga, an ex-editor of Amiga Power. The thing is, in that first Amiga Power, the developer interview turned out to be the most historically interesting part of the whole thing, and I suspect the same might be true here. Well, it'll be true once we decode that they've decided to print it in dark grey on slightly darker grey. Quite possibly the fault of one of the magazine's representatives on the panel, art assistant Milford Kopuk. I kinda hope not, because astonishingly 29 years later, the self-styled MILF still works for Future. He's in the most recent PC Gamer and was prominent in Future's last really good contemporary games magazine Play until its semi-recent closure. There are some light additional shenanigans here. PSM's first question is whether the £150 N64 spells the death of the PlayStation. MD of Binary Asylum, Bob Wade, replies that it's too late for the N64, it doesn't have enough software, and Nintendo didn't get into gear quick enough. A reasonable opinion, and one that time probably bears out. The problem is, Binary Asylum hadn't and would never release a PlayStation game. Or an N64 one for that matter. They went out of business a couple of years later when Interplay got bored waiting for them to finish a Windows-only Star Wars game they'd been developing for half a decade. So why is Bob, and indeed their design manager Trenton Webb, in a PlayStation roundtable? Well, that's Bob, former editor of Amstrad Action, Amiga Format and PC Format, Wade to you. Webb edited both Commodore and ST Format. They were very much in the Future Publishing family. Our deputy editor Steve Bradley points out the PlayStation was outselling the N64 20-1 after launch hype died down. He's interrupted by the chairman suddenly remembering what the whole point of this section is and asking the two coders what they think. Neither is enthusiastic to try and do so on Nintendo. This is perhaps not surprising. After all, this is a PlayStation magazine currently paying for their beers, and Neil Duffield works for Psygnosis and is thus more directly connected to Sony than anyone at the table. So let's take their N64 and indeed Saturn opinions with an LD50 of salt. That said, Derek Gilchrist of Core Design is currently working on the PlayStation exclusive Tomb Raider 2, and he says he prefers all 5 N64 games he owns to anything on PlayStation. Neil points out one issue. In the UK at least, the N64 launched at £249, by that point twice the cost of the other two machines, and then chopped £100 off that within 3 months. He suggests that if you'd waited the year or more as a Nintendo fan and dropped that cash, you'd be deeply pissed off. He's probably right. The remaining industry bod on the panel is also from Core Design, PR manager Susie Hamilton, possibly there to make sure Derek behaves and doesn't claim the game he's working on is worse than at least 5 N64 titles. She's already written off the N64 in Europe, saying that if they did develop something which they'd have to fund themselves, unlike Sony's contributions to Tomb Raider, they would do so just for overseas sales. True to their word, Core developed only one N64 game I can find, the somewhat unloved and forgotten Fighting Force, and that was a port a full 2 years after the PlayStation version. Bob predictably described Sony as welcoming and Nintendo as standoffish with developers, again very much matching their reputations. The result being that Sony had shovelware and Nintendo pretty much had nowhere beyond their first and second party offerings. He also spots the rise of the PC, illustrated by PC Format openly advertising PSX games but better in this very issue. Correctly, he points out PC and consoles coexist quite happily, something that absolutely continues to this day. Excellently, Gaming Legends Special Reserve are doing their part for this. Buy a Special Reserve PC and they'll throw in the PlayStation for free. We're almost exactly halfway through the PlayStation's life as the lead Sony console, and PSN want to know what tech advances are left. With Gran Turismo among many still to come, we know there were certainly some. Steve points out arcade quality is the generation's defining point, and he's right. We're in the tiny space between when all people wanted was an arcade-perfect port, and when they started complaining that arcade-perfect ports could be completed quite quickly when you had infinite credits. Neil thinks people are starting to be lazy, but Derek is confident in the speed increases they've managed to find for Tomb Raider 2. With the core engine running in less time, then they can start spending on other fancy things like dynamic lighting. Gran Turismo is a good example here. Everything that was technically better about the sequel to that came from the core physics engine being re-implemented much cheaper than it was in the first game. Even now, genre fatigue sets in. PSM describing the scene as endless Doom clones, racing games and beat-em-ups. Our driving game coverage this month certainly doesn't dissuade me from agreeing with them, although I'll contend all 4 reviewed driving games were very different concepts. It's a measure of how new Tomb Raider was that Trenton thinks that it's not in any particular genre, and Neil's first impression was of a Doom clone with an engine that's not as good as Quake's. Bob already thinks such games are in danger as publishers are risk-averse. The more things change, the more they stay the same, eh? Even Susie admits Core did not have high hopes for it, especially on PC where they were mostly unknown. She also drops the bomb that it could so easily have been Lookcroft if creator Toby Gard hadn't risked everything holding his ground on it. Finally, Trenton laments that part of this is the huge cost of games these days, and Bob suggests a game can cost 7 figures to make. Especially if you spend 5 years not actually making it, eh lads? I can't end the episode without a callback, because 3 years, but also 4 months, after he popped up in our December episode telling PC Gamer about his favourite games, it's only Terry bloody Pratchett again. Back in 1994 he claimed Wing Commander to be his favourite game, but pondered how he might remember Doom in a couple of years. Well, this is 3 years later and he still says he prefers high-class space stuff like Wing Commander, merely lumping Doom in with a whole slew of things since Wolfenstein. Like literally everyone in 1997, he was impressed with Tomb Raider. Of course, since then, he'd also helped make a game, Teeny Weeny's Discworld Adventure. But he doesn't really want to be solely responsible for a game, calling it restricting. He proves this by going on to perfectly describe the gameplay loop of Doom without ever naming Doom. It appears he was relatively hands-off with the Discworld games, but says his only rule was he shouldn't be able to prove anything was wrong, e.g. a character with a wildly wrong height. Finally, we never did get a Hollywood Discworld film, despite several TV series of which at least 2 aren't awful. Terry claims to get an offer a month for one, and his main reason for turning them down is that they were asking for small changes, like the removal of death. That never works! Did none of them read Mort? On the back page, you know how every 2-bit channel now has a Discord and most of them are emptier than this show's filming budget? Well, we think we've got the solution for you. Meet the Retro Software Discord from the Big Red Arrow Club, a joint Discord with several of the finest software-based YouTube channels. Join and enjoy chat, previews and what might be termed insight from myself, Timberwolf, Seb's Place, Goldfish, Yawning Angel, 81632-bit, What Ho Snorkers, and maybe even more. All the fun of a normal small channel Discord, but with enough people to carry a conversation. In my section, you'll find out exactly what's coming up on the channel, see behind the scenes of my attempts to capture footage, and experience me hitting up anyone with a mic to read out lines, because I forgot they were in the script until I reached that point in the edit. Thank you for this episode, Snorkers. The link to join is in the description. And join us next month for, well, if you were on the Discord, you'd already know. See you there.